Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. This podcast is dedicated to the millions of family caregivers who want wellness tips and self-care solutions, who seek expert advice, and who want news about healthy aging and how to create well home design in our forever homes. I'm Sherri Snelling, a corporate gerontologist, author, and educator, a TV interviewer, host, and news commentator. I'm joining you from Southern California, where our interviews and news take us all across the country to explore the many ways to help you on your caregiving journey and to lift you up here at Caregiving Club On Air. Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. I'm your host, Sherri Snelling, and we have got a lot of information to give to you this month of September. So we split it into two different episodes. For this first episode, we're going to focus on National Healthy Aging Month, and we have a really terrific guest interview with author Wayne Lehrer, who has written a new book called The Art of Conscious Aging. And Wayne is actually going to talk to us about how we can have a more engaging life, a more meaningful life. He's also going to talk about the three acts of life, but particularly that third act that we may be in as we get older. He's also going to share with us why sometimes we put anti-aging stereotypes on ourselves, but also how to find authentic happiness. It's a really great interview that I think you're going to really enjoy. And then as we dive into our caregiver wellness news, we are also celebrating National Self-Care Month. As you guys know, that's kind of my big mantra when it comes to caregivers taking care of themselves. Well, I came across three recent research studies, and they all speak to how we can live longer, healthier, and happier. The first is around walking, which is really interesting. The second one is around sleepmaxing, and if you haven't heard of that new trend on TikTok, we'll take you through what that means. The third is around grandparenting and how grandparenting actually does help us live longer and happier. And I'm also going to touch upon theme from my book, Me Time Monday, called The Grandmother Hypothesis. And then as we switch to Well Home Design News, we've got two really big kind of trends and bits of news that have come out recently. The first is around falls. Now, September 22nd through the 26th, I think it is National Falls Prevention Week or National Falls Prevention Awareness Week. And so we thought it was a great time to share this study with you. But what it's showing us is that more older adults are dying from falls in the home than ever before. That's a really interesting study, and we're going to talk to you about why. And then also, we're going to talk about solo agers. So, as we get older, the people who are living alone, how the solo agers are actually changing the real estate market. So stay with us through this great episode, and let's go ahead and dive into our caregiver wellness news. So as I mentioned, September is National Healthy Aging Month, but it also happens to be National Self-Care Month. So I want to start with that information that we have for you in our Caregiver Wellness News. First of all, as I said, we're going to talk about three wellness hacks that are great for healthy aging. And as many of you know, I'm a gerontologist, and one of the things that we study in gerontology is something we call the BPS framework. And what that stands for is biology, B, psychology, P, and sociology, S. And how those three things intersect in our lives, and how we definitely need balance in those three sections of our lives to achieve better happiness, better health, and certainly more longevity. Now, in my book, Me Time Monday, I take the BPS framework of those three categories and I break it down into 7 different elements. So as I go through these three recent studies that I've seen in these three wellness hacks I have for you, I'll kind of reference both the BPS as well as my 7 elements, what I call it. But the first one is actually around walking. So that would be more of our biology or our physical wellness. And of course, as we know, there's been lots of studies done on the benefits of walking. There was one article that was done in the Journal of American Heart Association that showed walking briskly for just 15 minutes a day reduced your premature death by 20%, which is pretty interesting. And then, a lot of people have asked me, well, how many steps should I really be taking a day? I just had this conversation actually with my mom, and because we do walking every week, and 10,000 steps, by the way, was never a scientific model. It was actually a marketing campaign. It was just something to get people out more, but it was never really based on any kind of studies or things that were found. So here's what we know now, and these are studies that come from, Harvard and other renowned institutions and great peer-reviewed evidence-based research. One of the things we know is that even moderate walking on a daily basis, such as going, let's say, from 2,700 steps up to 4,400 steps, it can lead to significant health improvements, particularly for older women. So, this myth of 10,000 that we're trying to push ourselves to, that is tough. And a lot of people who don't do a lot of walking in cities, I'm here in California, we're car culture. Obviously, my work has me sitting a lot during the day. 10,000 becomes a little intimidating. And so don't push yourself, look for that 4,400 to 5,000 steps fairly briskly. I walk my dog fairly fast, but those are the kinds of things that can really help. Now, let me turn to this new study on walking, which is really related to brain health. And so, one of the things we know again about walking, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat today, is that it boosts our four happiness hormones that I talk about again in my book. And that would be endorphins, which is kind of just the regular movement and physicality that it releases this feel good hormone, serotonin, which is our mood boost hormone, dopamine, which is our reward hormone, and then oxytocin, which is one that makes us feel closer to others, particularly if we're walking with others. And all of these hormones reduce our stress and anxiety and depression. They also reduce inflammation, which we know the I word, inflammation, is now the big word that we're all looking at in living longer and particularly brain health. And it also reduces oxidative stress and inflammation. And that, when we walk outside in nature, is the optimal type of walking. So you can walk on a treadmill indoors, or in your garage gym or wherever you may do that, but walking outside in nature is really going to boost more of that oxidative stress decrease and decrease of inflammation. And the additional thing about walking, which is interesting, and that this study talked about, is that you get a visual sensation through the connection and the neurotransmitters in the brain of what we call optic flow. And that's where objects appear to move past you. And it signals your brain to relax. So it shifts you out of those kind of stress induced moments or episodes of fight or flight and puts you in more of what we call homeostasis, which is balance. Now, what's interesting about this that I think about for caregivers is that very often we're carrying around a lot of frustration, or it could be anger, or it could be sadness. And it could be a sense of being out of control, not being able to help our loved ones in the way that we want, not being able to rid our loved ones of things like Alzheimer's disease. And so when you walk outside and you're passing certain things that maybe you see on a daily basis. You're passing trees, you're passing bushes, maybe flowers, or whatever it is, but things are moving past you. What it signals to the brain is not only a sense of relaxation, but also a feeling of empowerment. You can get past some of these negative stressors in your life. So walking really becomes, the prescription, I think, over so many other things, of course, that we can do. And I know meditation and breathing and all those things are really great. I find those to be really helpful if you're feeling anxious. But if you're just feeling that overall stress and frustration or sadness, walking is really great. So here's what the new study found. They actually studied people between the ages of 65 and 80, and this is really interesting, in just 5 minutes. Now, you guys know I talk about 7 minutes is all it takes to get ourselves to a sense of kind of maybe more happiness or balance or whatever. Well, this is 5 minutes. And this is just 5 minutes of low impact cardio activity, but particularly something like a brisk walk. 5 minutes of a brisk walk improved your brain's processing speed, which is how fast, your brain thinks, Your executive functioning, which is how well you plan, how focused you are you able to maybe multitask? And your working memory, which is your ability to store information for short periods of time. So that would be more of our short term memory that'll ultimately, when we get good sleep, it turns into long term memory. But 5 minutes, that's it. 5 minutes of getting out and walking a day is actually going to improve your brain health. So, my message to everybody, and particularly to family caregivers, is that walking 5 to 15 minutes a day is going to really be, again, your prescription, I think, to get you back into balance, fight off those stressors, improve your brain health, and just make you feel better. Now, on a couple of other notes, since we're talking about healthy aging, we know that weightlifting as we age is really good because we lose a lot of our muscle mass and our bone density, and our bone strength. And so there was a New York Times article called Pumping Iron for Longevity. And it talked about the barbell prescription, which was a book that was written in actually 2016. But it's all about lifting weights and kind of pushing yourself a little bit, not to the point where you're going to injure yourself. So you have to be very careful, but they're talking about people who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s doing some, resistance training and certainly some barbells or dumbbells or things like that. And so the American College of Sports Medicine recommends that most older adults perform some form of resistance exercise at least twice a week, and less than a third of Americans are meeting that prescription. So we're not doing it. So think about that as well. Maybe there's some small hand weights or other things you can do even while you're on your walk. You can kind of habit stack. You can do two things at once. I know we talked about the walking is the new walking, and that's where you kind of wear maybe like a weighted vest, which gives you a little bit more of that resistance training. So there's a lot of things out there that we can think about, but we know that weightlifting will also help with falls prevention. And we're going to talk about falls in the Well Home Design segment. But we know that it makes you stronger and helps you lower your blood pressure so you're not quite as dizzy, which are two things that, when we're weaker and we don't have, kind of the stamina and we get dizzy or whatever, that's when we fall. And also, weightlifting is going to help you if you do need a surgery. A lot of people get hip replacements or knee replacements when they're older. Well, this is going kind of picking up a few weights and strengthening your muscles and your bone density before you go in for those surgeries is really kind of critical in terms of your recovery period and getting you through that recovery a little faster. And then finally, in this healthy aging section, I came across a really interesting article on the actress Helen Mirren. Many of you know her. She's been in just about everything. I loved her in Red. She was great. She was also in The Queen. I think she won an Oscar for that. Anyway, Helen turned 80 this year. And she's been doing a 10-minute workout for 60 years. And it was actually based on something that the Canadian um, uh, Army, I guess, put together for their boot camps and their recruitment training and all that. But it's very similar to what I wrote about in Me Time Monday, which was based on a plan by J.P. Mueller that was created back in 1904. And it's simple movements. It's kind of swinging your arms. It's, lifting up your legs. It's, bending over here and there, but being careful, of course, as we get older. We don't want to get too dizzy. But it's basically 10 minutes a day is all you need. So, when we push ourselves to think we have to be in the gym for 40 minutes, we have to run a half marathon. And those of you that can, kudos to you. But we don't have to push ourselves to those kinds of extremes. I've never been somebody that has been like super active. I hate to say that. I was a gymnast when I was younger, but that was when I was really young. And so I'm tend to be one that I love, my couch and all that. So I have to push myself to get a little bit more active, but you don't have to do it, for 40 minutes or whatever. You don't have to find those big, huge pockets of time. And so that works out too for our family caregivers who we know have no time to be working out. Now, let me move into the second thing that I found in these wellness hacks, and that's sleep maxing. If you haven't heard of this, is the big trend on TikTok right now. And as you guys know, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with social media, mostly on the hate side. particularly as, certain recent news elements are showing us how detrimental it is, particularly to our younger generations. But that aside, certain things do come out of TikTok. And what I like to do is I like to address them because very often a lot of the stuff that's talked about on TikTok has no science behind it, no medical value whatsoever. And I like to debunk it because I think we do need to be careful. So many, again, of our younger people are looking to TikTok to tell them how to take care of their health, which is awful. This one's interesting because it's a mixed bag, and they're calling it sleep maxing on TikTok. And it's really about helping your emotional and mental health. So we know that obviously good restorative sleep is going to help your physical health. It's going to help with that muscle and cellular repair that we all need at night. But we also know for brain health and for kind of modulating our emotions, balancing out some of the mental health issues we might be having, sleep is essential. So here's the good stuff that's in some of these TikTok videos on sleep maxing. Good sleep environment. So, dark, cool, quiet. That's all good. Doing soothing activities before bed. So, not watching any kind of TV drama or even comedy that makes you laugh. It's more like reading, meditating, drinking herbal tea. Now, that one I would do a little caveat on. You don't want to drink anything 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. So I might jettison that one. Reducing all blue light exposure. This is key and critical, and I write about this a lot in Me Time Monday. And that's when we have to just do that digital detox, and we really need to do it at least a good 2, if you can, 3 hours before bed. I know that sounds like crazy because so many of us are doing work from home or, we're catching up on social media or whatever. But it's all of that blue light emission, and there's a latency period to it. So the longer that you use it, you think, okay, I put it down, so now I'm ready for bed. Your body is still kind of energized by the blue light. And so it's going to take you longer to get into the deep rested sleep, even though you've put it down an hour ago. So think about that. Using sleep trackers and noise machines. Okay, I don't mind that. In fact, I write a lot about pink noise. Pink noise is kind of the type of noise on your noise machine that simulates soft nature sounds, which have been shown to be the best kind of noise to get us into the deep restorative sleep and keep us into sleep longer. Okay, so it does actually help us get to those 7 or 8 hours that many of us try to achieve. And by the way, pink noise is great for infants all the way through people who are in their 80s and 90s. Herbal supplements. Okay, big red warning flag on this one because we're seeing people overdose on melatonin supplements. Now, melatonin, as you know, is what helps us with the light dark cycles and, circadian rhythms. Now, overdose does not mean you're dying. No, we're not seeing a lot of fatalities, but we are seeing people who have rashes and hives and are very drowsy and it's upsetting their circadian rhythm. So be very, very careful about those herbal supplements. We see the word herbal and we think it's safe. Not always. You should talk to your doctor and also be very, very cautious if you're on other medications because you have to know what the interaction is with those herbal supplements before you take them. And then regularity of sleep schedules, and that's getting to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time. That, besides the 7 to 8 hours that we try to get to, the regularity is probably the second most important thing that you need to do. Now, what is bad in the sleep maxing TikTok videos? Well, taping your mouth. Yeah, no, there's no science behind that. In fact, it can be very dangerous for people who, even at a very young age, might have, sleep apnea or pre-sleep apnea or, have allergies and stuff. So they're breathing a little bit more through their mouth. We don't like that, but it happens. Well, if you're taping your mouth closed, can be very harmful. And then just stressing over sleep. If you're using a sleep tracker and you're not getting to where you want to be, now you're stressing about the numbers and the metrics. And again, digital detox. Just put all that stuff away and just base it on how you feel. You don't have to look at a fitness tracker or a ring around your finger or whatever it is to tell you how you feel. You know your body better than anyone else. So If you're feeling good, great. If you're not feeling so good, then you know that maybe you need to try a few other things. So that's our sleep maxing. And lastly, the third recent study in our last wellness hack for self care is grandparenting. Now, National Grandparents Day, we celebrate on September 10th. And this is more of in our sociology, social wellness kind of space. And there was a recent article that came out in Time magazine that was about research that had been done that grandparenting for older adults makes them feel purposeful, helps them stay active, helps them have gratitude, and helps you feel the joy of youth. We kind of get to relive our childhoods a little bit. We get to play, we get to have fun. And it certainly gives us again that, burst of our four happiness hormones that are so important for brain health. And one of the things that the study said is that grandkids can be a buffer against loneliness and isolation and feeling irrelevant. It makes you move more. And so, just like pet ownership, we might get outside more. We might, maybe run around or at least walk more. And so, rather than being a burden to try to get your steps in. Now all of a sudden, it's just fun. It's part of your play plan. It keeps you sharp because a lot of times we have our younger kids and grandkids who are teaching grandparents about, social media, internet, or texting, or whatever it is. Some of the new digital tools that can be helpful to keep us all connected. And then just that human connection. One of the things I write about in my book is about social wellness being a big, big piece of our health and our longevity. And the Harvard Adult Development Study has borne this out for 85 years. It said the number one secret to living longer, healthier, and happier is having quality relationships and having a confidant who has your back, but also just having quality relationships, and particularly those that we can create with younger generations. And if you're not a grandparent, like I'm not, but I have nephews and I have friends' kids, so any way that you can, kind of integrate and have fun and have activities with the younger generation, even if it's in your community, volunteering or doing other things is really helpful. And then just a quick shout out because I wrote about this in my book, Me Too Monday, on the grandmother hypothesis. So, what is that? Well, scientists are on both sides of this debate, I will tell you. But what it says is that, based on our evolution of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, older women in a tribe were their role was to watch over and nurture the younger children while the younger female adults continued to gather and cook and also continue to have babies. And so the grandmothers took care of kind of, the children that were growing up. And so there's a hypothesis that this is why older women have a tendency to live longer than older men. Now, a lot of that's changing. We're seeing some of the demographics change. Men are starting to catch up to older women and live a little bit longer. And maybe that's because grandparents and grandfathers in particular are more involved now with the grandkids. It's not like, oh, yeah, I'm going to just golf and do my own thing. No, they're more involved. So maybe that is part of it. But the grandmother hypothesis I thought was really interesting. Now, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning about National Centenarian Day, which is on September 22nd, the secrets of the centenarians. And this was really interesting because it has a special spot in my heart when I was working for a very large health and wellness company. I was in charge of a special project that we ran for 5 years where we surveyed people over the age of 100 about what are the secrets to living longer. And part of doing this survey was I would go out and I would video interview a lot of these centenarians who were hilarious. And their stories were just so not only inspiring, but just wonderful. And it was really something that I just loved doing. It didn't really seem like a job. So I love the centenarians, and I wanted to read you some quick stats, and then I wanted to tell you what is their secret to breakfast, why breakfast is so critical, and what they typically eat. What's the average centenarian diet? So, quick stats, which is from the New England Centenarian Study. First of all, they've decided that there's three different groups of centenarians. One is what they call the escapers, that's 15%, where they've really had no severe health issues and a great quality of life, even up to 100. Then we've got our delayers, that's about 43%. And those are people who were really in great health until around 80. And then maybe here and there things started to happen, whatever, but they still have good quality of life. They're still very engaged. And then the survivors, which is the 42%, those are people who had a chronic illness before the age of 80, but they overcame it. Maybe it was breast cancer, prostate cancer, they survived it, and they're still obviously living longer. And so here's their secret in terms of breakfast. First of all, one, and this comes, by the way, from the Blue Zones author, Dan Buettner. He's been studying the pockets of centenarians across the globe called the Blue Zones. And he's just recently updated that research. I think it was last year or a couple years ago. And one of the things we know is skipping breakfast at any age increases your risk for diabetes 2, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's. Okay, so skipping breakfast is not a good thing. And the three things that you want to do when you think about your nutritional diet is you want to look for foods that are going to help decrease your inflammation. There's the I word again, inflammation. Get balance in your gut, in your microbiome. That's a big one. More and more people now are really into probiotics and things. So that's what that's all about. And also micronutrients. And then increase your energy. And then use the 80-20 rule. So 80% of the time, you're eating these good foods. So you get 20% off where you can kind of go a little crazy, but then you go right back on track. Now, here are the foods that they eat: oatmeal, which has high fiber, helps with colon cancer prevention. But we have to be careful because people who have chronic kidney disease, IBS or IBD, celiac disease, and diabetes, they need to be careful of oatmeal. You've got to either go gluten free or you need to add seeds, like maybe some flax seeds, which not only decreases your blood pressure, but it also helps slow down the absorption of the sugar that is in the oatmeal. So it helps level out those blood sugar levels, which if you don't do that, sometimes oatmeal can really kickstart that, which is really bad for diabetes and other things. The second dish is an egg or tofu scramble. So if you throw in things like spinach, tomatoes, mushrooms, peppers, any kind of good veggies and stuff you've got in your refrigerator, this is a superpower breakfast. So eggs build B12 protein, which is really critical, particularly after the age of 50, but also antioxidants that help reduce, again, that oxidative stress, which leads to inflammation. So this is going to decrease your cardiovascular disease risk, your Alzheimer's risk. And then, but eat the eggs with oats in moderation, maybe not more than 3 or so times a week, just to help not spike any cholesterol issues or things you might have. Although eggs have gotten such a bad rap for so many years, and now people are saying, you know what, eggs are actually one of our superpower foods. And then on the tofu side, if you're more like a vegan, then you can eat tofu, which is really processed soybeans. And the tofu is even okay if you've had breast cancer, because if you have a breast cancer risk or have had breast cancer, you want to be really careful about soy in your diet, but the tofu is okay. And then the next breakfast of the centenarians is loaded toast. So we all know, I mean, I love avocado toast. So avocados and tomatoes, or maybe put cinnamon or honey and fruit. All of these things actually reduce inflammation. And then keep in mind the toast type. So sourdough toast has no sugar, which is good. And of course, wheat toast will not have your blood spike your blood sugar levels. So those are both really good. And then the next breakfast is yogurt with fruit and granola. Enough said. I can tell you personally that I started to kind of get some gut issues as I got over the age of 50, and I, tried probiotics and I was doing different things, but I found something that worked for me, and it's Siggy yogurt. And, I don't get paid from that from them. So this is not a commercial, but I just found that that particular yogurt, for whatever reason, I know it's lower in sugars, but I love the vanilla cinnamon flavor, and I literally eat it every day. And if I don't get it, if I go maybe 2 or 3 days without that yogurt, I I'm telling you, I can really feel it. So for me, that is what really works. So the yogurt's great. And then miso soup, if you're looking, particularly as we get into the colder months and you're looking for something more savory, you want that mommy taste, miso soup is actually really great. And it has good probiotics and micronutrients. So this is all gut microbiome stuff. So you can check that out. So those are all really important things to think about. as we get older. And, I think with that, we're going to go into this great interview with Wayne Lehrer. I give a little bit of an intro to him, but Wayne has done so many things. I mean, he was an IMAX producer and he did events all over the globe and he's done workshops and he teaches a meditation class at the USC Gerontology School. He's an author, and I think this is maybe his third or fourth book he's going to tell us. But he's just a fascinating person, and he talks about he hit age 62 and it was like a brick wall. And he felt really depressed, and he wasn't sure what the rest of his life was supposed to be about. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about that, and that is all what brought forward this latest book that he has called The Art of Conscious Aging, which is a super terrific book. I loved it. It's got not only Wayne's personal experiences, he also talks to other people, so he brings their stories into it. And he has a lot of really great science and research and other things that are certainly good in terms of solutions and things that you can do. So here is my great interview with Wayne Lehrer on the art of conscious aging. So as I mentioned, I am so thrilled to have our guest on this episode, which is for September Healthy Aging Month, and it's just perfect. And so we welcome Wayne Lehrer, who is many, many things, but the author of a book that just came out called The Art of Conscious Aging. Wayne, welcome to Caregiving Club on Air.
Thank you so much, Sherri. It's great to be here with you.
Well, it's so great to have you on, and I know we have this mutual connection through USC, so, fight on, Trojans. We have to stick together and support each other, but you've done so many fantastic things. But the first thing I want to ask is, where are we talking to you from today?
Oh, I'm in Santa Monica, California.
Beautiful Santa Monica, and of course, we're talking in September, and it's still gorgeous out. In fact, I think we're headed into probably our hottest month this year, right?
Oh, it's been amazing. I run and walk on the beach every morning, and then I go body surfing 6 days a week. So it doesn't get any better than this. These are the good old days.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's hard to beat. I tell people, yeah, I do live in paradise. Sorry. Anyway, let's launch into this because there is so much to talk about in your new book. And I got a chance to read through it, and it's just really fascinating, all the things you kind of touch upon. But as I mentioned, you've had this extraordinarily diverse career path. So you've been a World's Fair and theme park designer, IMAX filmmaker, master yoga and meditation teacher, health advocate, international workshop leader, sculptor, and certainly an author and also a teacher and professor. But about 10 years ago, when you were in your early 60s, you had this epiphany. So tell us what that was all about.
Well, I got depressed. I got depressed and I didn't know what it was. And uh, you know, with all of the spiritual work I'd done and all the self-awareness I had, I just really wasn't in touch. So I went to go see a therapist. I'm in 12-step programs, so I do a lot of introspection, and I've been a meditator almost all my life. And as you mentioned, I teach meditation and yoga, so I've done all of that stuff. So I'm pretty self-aware. But this depression really just got to me, and so I went to see a therapist, and a couple months into it, he wasn't really helping me very much, and I had started writing the book because everyone a bunch of 10 years ago, about 2 years before I hit this depression, maybe a year before, I met the dean of the top school of gerontology in the world, the president of AARP, and the number one fitness person for the baby boomers, the woman who invented exercise videos in the 70s. And they're all my best friend, literally my best friends in the world now. I met them all in one weekend. And
Wow.
they all said, "Oh, you should write a book on the subject." So I had started writing it and hadn't really connected my depression to that. And while I'm working with the therapist, and I realized at one point as I'm writing, I realized that the purpose of my book that I didn't know when I started writing it, I just thought I was going to say, this is how you deal with it, diet, and this is how you deal with sleep, and this is how you deal with getting stuck in regrets and resentments, all the things I cover in the book. I didn't realize that the real issue behind the book was making this transition from second act operating system of achieving, acquiring, building, succeeding, competing, to the third act operating system, which is totally different. Now, some of those things still come to play, but you're no longer driven by ambition and ego. You have to find a new motor for things that you do, and you're no longer, and your kids are gone, so your identity as a parent has gone, and you may not be at work anymore, or your work may have changed, and so your identity as a earner and a ladder climber, and my I am my job, and all of a sudden I realized all of those things had dissipated, and I was having an impossible time defining who I was. And so I was in what I call the third act identity crisis.
Which I love, and I think that's something that's so normal, right? I mean, we have these bonus years, if you will, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years
Yeah.
of living longer. And yet the world is still focused around, well, you retire at 62, you play golf for a couple of years, and then you drop dead. And that's just not the truth anymore. And we do have this whole third act. So that was something that I thought was really fascinating in the book. And what I want you to get into, why don't we just jump into that? And then I want to go back to something, but you mentioned the third act. So you talk about life in three acts, which
Yes.
to me is kind of like a play, right?
Yeah.
You've got your opener, your mid, and then your ending. But how are they different? And why is the third act really important? And what should we know about it?
Okay. So first of all, historically, as a species, the third act was a year or two, if any. Most people died still in their second act up until 1900. The third act, in other words, the idea of retirement, which is, the Western version of the third act, which was, 2 to maybe 10 years long for most people. And like you said, it was golf, cruises, Barco lounger, grandchildren, doctor visits. That was it. That was the third act. So here we go. The first act, 0 to 20, basically learning, finding out who I am, finding out how the world works. It's a period of dependence. That's the basic overview of the third act. I mean, of the first act. The second act goes from basically 20 to mid 50s, or my estimate, I see almost everybody hit it exactly at 60, but you begin to go into this third act identity crisis somewhere in your 50s. So the second act is as I mentioned, you're building, you're achieving, you're developing ego, you're competing, you're succeeding, you're creating my home, my family, my job. So it's the period of independence. So you go from dependence to independence. And then somewhere along the way, somewhere around 50, you begin some of those things, in other words, your body doesn't work as well. 52, your kids, your mother, let's say you got a master's degree, and right out of that you had your first kid, and so you never even got to do what your master's degree was, so you became defined as a mother. And your definition, the husband or whoever, you may have two breadwinners, I'm defined as a marketing analyst or a lawyer or whatever it is I do. So it's all about what we do. And all of a sudden, those things start getting taken away. I can't play basketball with my buddies anymore because I'm having knee issues. My kids are gone, so I'm no longer a mother. I've left my work, and I'm no longer whatever I am. So that's the movement from the second act to the third act. Happens somewhere, like I said, mid 50s to 60 years old. And then the transition takes as long as it does. And many people don't make a successful transition because this is very important. Between the first and second act, we have what's always been called the identity crisis. And the identity crisis is from being dependent to becoming independent. I leave my parents' house, I go away to college, I'm deciding what I eat every day, who I hang out with every day, what are good and bad behaviors that I think are good and bad behaviors instead of my parents, what I want to do. I'm led down a channel at college. Most people don't choose the job they do. It's got to do with what major they can get into and what classes are available. Next thing you know, they've not even made their decisions based upon what makes me happy and what doesn't make me happy, what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. For at least a big percentage of people are just shooting it along into their. So the identity crisis is very short because we're just moved along on this conveyor belt, right? And B, there's tons of role models. You want to be famous? Great. You want to be a, you want to be a six, you want to make a lot of money. You got Elon Musk, you got Steve Jobs, you got, you want to become a celebrity. You've got, tons of role models. Okay. So that first act identity crisis is pretty smooth. It's a year or two. And, obviously it's what it is. And it's much more challenging now. This whole thing of failure to launch is a whole different thing because now people are moving into a second act that's lost its meaning in its old way. But that's a whole nother conversation. That's not what my book's about. The third act is about collaborating, building community, giving back, being an elder, sharing your gifts and your wisdom, um, creating vehicles for your wisdom, your gifts, and your passions to move into the world in a new way. And to do that, you can't use ambition or ego as the driver anymore because I don't know about you, but ambition doesn't motivate me anymore. I'm not busy building my ego. What you see is what you get at this point. You get a 74-year-old bald-headed Jewish guy who does what he does, right? And I don't need to make any excuses, and I don't need to prove anything. I mean, of course, we all do a little bit, that doesn't completely go away. But so what happens now is I've got no role models. Art Magazine, the number one magazine for retirement, they only post every time they put someone on the cover, they celebrate them for living successful second act principles in their third act. Tom Cruise, 57, still does his own stunts. You
Mhm.
still want to hang out on the wing of an airplane at 60 years old? I don't think so. So no one's celebrating. I mean, few people are celebrating Jimmy Carter, for example, whose third act was way more successful than his second act. People arguably say his presidency didn't get a lot accomplished. I'm not in agreement, but nevertheless, he created Habitat for Humanity.
Right.
Clinton created the Clinton Initiative, did far more in his third act. So, and Oprah has done more in her third act. There are people, but they're not celebrated for that as the most part, and they're not seen as we haven't we haven't organized the principles that represent a successful third act identity.
Right.
So basically, and like you said, we've now got 20 to 50 years. Before you had 2 to 10 years, if you were lucky. Many people died at the peak of their second act. They had a heart attack at
Yeah.
52 years old. I mean, I have so many friends whose fathers died. I think they say 54 or 55 is the number one heart attack year. You're at the peak of your second act.
Right.
So yeah, so that's the breakdown on the third act. And the final thing on the third act is in plays or in books or in movies, the third act is where the hero rises to the occasion and redeems themselves. It's not the end. Yes, of course, the end of the book happens, but it happens after the hero has risen from incredible odds, left all of the bad people behind or beat them in some way or another, and arrived as their true self. In the case of myths like Parsifal finds the Grail Cup and comes back and saves King Arthur. These are all third act things, and they all have to do with taking all the diverse parts of myself that I've spent 60 years researching, developing, investing my time and energy into, directly and indirectly, and out of those fashioning an offering to the world that's my way of giving back.
So there's a couple of things I want to touch on because this is so fascinating to me. First of all, what you're describing is something I kind of talk about in my book and some of the writings that I do, and that is that we look at the end of life as the D words, right? Disease, decay, decline, dementia,
Love that.
depression, death. And how do we turn the D words into the P words? Passion, purpose, play, peak experiences. In a way, it's almost like you've spent your life in the first and second the first act figuring it out, the second act being responsible and doing all the things that you've kind of built. And then there's almost like this freedom in the third act. But society still wants to only make us, there's this thing going on in aging right now called super agers.
Yeah.
And the super agers are typically defined as people who are still really physically fit. And like you
Yeah.
said, Tom Cruise, who can still jump out of a plane and all these other things. And so it's really defining us by how long can we hang on to the 20, 30s, and 40s instead
Yeah.
of really celebrating the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So talk a little bit about that and kind of this ageism that we see play out.
Okay. So the way I call it, you call it the P versus D. I call it the re years. Recreate, reimagine, redesign, reinvent, reincarnate, reborn. Those are all the things you have to do. So it's so and the main thing is that I believe that what happens is we get a chance to look back at our life, and this is sort of what my first book was about, which is called The Prodigy Within: The Quest to Discover Your Life's Purpose for late bloomers and other seekers. And my belief is that we take our natural things that we're passionate about. We take those gifts that we've developed consciously and unconsciously. So I believe that there's a force behind every choice we've made in our life that's, even when the choice looks stupid, was something that we were going to learn that was going to be able to be of value to us later. So we're motivated by our higher self and our lower self in our second act, by our ego and by this need to self-express, or what Maslow calls self-actualize. So a time comes, let me shut this off, sorry about that. A time comes that where it's time to put together our natural things that are important to us, the gifts that we've developed, the various different occupations we've had, and the essence of what we've learned in all of those things, and then what it is that we respond to in the world as the world's need.
Mm.
And we put all of those together, and that's the period of what I believe is the third act identity crisis, which is taking all of what I've been, this whole idea of the caterpillar and the butterfly. What they don't tell you in that story is there's a period of time when the caterpillar's inside the cocoon where it's clear jelly. Did you know that?
Didn't know that.
No, 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 they never talk about it. They say we have this idea that the caterpillar's in there and he's going through all these changes and he's growing wings and stuff. No, the caterpillar completely turns into clear jelly. There's nothing inside in the cocoon but clear jelly, and then out of the clear jelly, the butterfly happens. So I believe for us really to go into our third act, we have to go through a period of sacrifice, self-reflection, identity, re-identifying, finding our identity, redesigning who we are, really looking at what matters to us, and out of that, we then come to the world and we say, "Oh, I'm going to write a book and do podcasts, or I'm going to talk to aging." Why did I meet those three people in one weekend, and uh, a bunch of my best friends, all within a month of each other, said, "You're the youngest looking blah blah I know. You should write a book on aging. You know about meditation. You know all this stuff. You've always been on diet, blah blah." And I thought, oh, and that was the perfect place for me then to do that. And the process of doing it actually cooked me the rest of the way, turned me into jelly enough that when I came out the other side, I was free of a lot of the stuff that would keep me stuck in my second act. So I've got chapters in my book called "You're Not, the life you're living is the story you're telling." If I keep telling a story about all the good old days when I did this and when I did that, there's no room for the good old days to be now.
Right.
If I'm carrying resentments towards all of the situations where I failed or where somebody blocked me, where I'm a victim, where the world was against me, then I've got no chance to actually show up as a youthful person with opportunities to learn and grow again.
Right.
So that's it.
No, I love this. And there's something I want to touch upon because I think it's really important. On our podcast here, we talk about obviously things like healthy aging for our own sake and how do we do that? But also we have a lot of family caregivers who listen to this podcast. And when you talked about sacrifice and giving back and finding, kind of your true self and self-identity, I think in some ways, caregiving can be seen sometimes as a burden, but what you just described to me is, can we help caregivers see this is an experience that is going to help you?
Yeah.
in your third act, you're going through that jelly phase right now.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
So I think you've hit on something that's very important. There's two elements to this giving back. There's the element in our personal, and we have to balance them. And it's very challenging, especially, for example, if all of a sudden one of our parents that we become a caregiver to is like an Alzheimer patient or somebody who's a shut-in or whatever it is, and they require a lot of our energy, and we may not be able to give back to the world at large during that time, you know? And there's the other side of it where we're saying, what's that magnanimous, um, wise elder thing that I could be giving back to? And finding the balance between those two is its own issue. But I think that what's primary to both of them is that we live in a country where nothing is ever enough, and we are very much uh, rewarded for being selfish
Mhm.
or self-centered.
Yeah,
And all of a sudden, most people that reach my age have had to, in some way or another, take care of one parent or the other,
right.
you know, let alone what they may have to have done for their children. But certainly they've learned a certain degree of selflessness along the way that makes them a better human being, that makes them more those kind of growth things, they don't come from having learned those as a child. I was taught to be kind. Yes, many people, I didn't have those parents. My parents had not read the operating manual for being a good parent.
Right.
I was not graced with, I never knew to say thank you. I never knew to help people who had less than me. These weren't lessons learned at home. So some of them are learned the hard way, by all of a sudden, you know, being stuck with a parent who has no one else but you, if that's the way you perceive it, and being stuck with them then makes so we only grow through rising to the occasion, most of us, to getting called out. So that's the one side of it. The other side of it is I believe deep within all of us, because I think we're basically tribal, beings at our root. We're social, we're social beings. We have a desire to benefit the tribe, to benefit our culture, our society. Now, some of us do that and we get very shut down behind it. It's us versus them, the Christians versus the Muslims, the red states versus the blue states. But I believe that there's a higher calling that you only get to when you find that selflessness of saying, what is it that I can make a contribution to in the world, both in my personal world, with my children, like a lot of times I know people burdened with, children that are failed to launch, and their children are 40 or 50 years old and they're still supporting them. Is that the best use of your energy? And does that help your kid at all? These are hard questions to answer, but if you don't at least meet them head on, you're not going to grow as a human, and therefore you're not going to benefit anyone around you, let alone your
Right.
kid or your parent. So I think the bottom line of what I'm saying is that we need the challenges that life brings us, and we also have to ask the question that brings us to those challenging things. Like, as you know, I spent 5 years writing my book, and it's both personal research, scientific research, friend research, self-reflection research. It was a process. The fact that I met that process head on made me be able to write a book that has value to everybody instead of just being, good information.
Yeah.
And I think
And
go
and
ahead.
I love that part of your book, the way that you formatted or structured it. You do have your own personal growth and share that, but you have the other stories too, which are really insightful. Um, and there was something so personal growth, I think you're right. And I think we need to support caregivers in saying you're going through a personal growth experience, embrace it. This
Yeah.
is something that will be good to you on the other side, as you come through this kind of journey that might seem really challenging. There was a chapter I was fascinated by, and it was called You Are Not Your Story. Now, in our world today, we're told that storytelling is essential, it's really important. We all have to tell our stories. But you just were touching upon, but our stories shouldn't be all about the past. So talk a little bit about how can people embrace their story in the right way?
Um, it's so important. You cannot get on with your life. I mean, we all know elderly people or old people. I mean, many of the people that we call old are people that every time you see them, they tell you about, back when I was working at so and so, or when I could do that, or when I won that thing, or when they all live for those peak experience moments where they climbed to the top of the mountain or when the world completely crashed down on them, and they become that story, and that's all there's room for. And I think for us to be able to get on with our life, we have to be able to, I hit my 60s, and I was so burdened with the regret, one primary regret. I had reached the top of the world in terms of designing, and I had designed 6 pavilions for one World's Fair in South Korea. And I also then made a 3D IMAX film that I was the producer director of, that was voted best exhibit at the World's Fair. And 1 week before the World's Fair happened, I was sent home because the owners of the company didn't want to share the stage with me. And it shattered me. And it shattered me enough that even though I did still other good project, I did this big I did the first computer generated children's show on TV. I did other great things. There was something in me broken by that, and that became a regret that paralyzed me in so many ways. And it wasn't until I finally said to myself, "Wait a second, I did this amazing thing." The fact that the fact that daddy and mommy didn't pat me on the back for it, the fact that it didn't turn into a bigger and better, more money opportunity, that had nothing to do. So when I passed through the process of regret, I was free, and I never thought I'd get another big opportunity again. And I've had many since then. But it was the process of letting go of that primary story in my case. And I think for most of us, it's multiple stories of the identity of the things that happened to me good and the things that happened bad, rather than this idea that, hey, I show up and go to the beach every morning and run and jump in the ocean. That's as good as it gets.
Right. It is.
People all over the world want to be able to do that. And I'm like going to judge it by this other thing that isn't happening as fast as I wanted to, or as big as I wanted to, or as worldwide as I wanted to. That's just a way. So that's the main problem with story and so we have to learn to tell a new story. And the only way to do that is say, who do I want? So this brings us back to the second act to third act thing. I think a lot of people get to their third act and they ask themselves, have I created anything of real value?
Mm.
That's a big question that many people actually are forced to confront. I'm going to die soon. So they face their mortality. So the old stories don't have anything to do with where I'm going.
Right.
Right? And if I hold on to them, I'm dying quicker. Because
Right.
what youth is described as is doing new things, challenging ourselves, stepping out of our comfort zones. Those are all things that people we call old, don't do. And the people we think of as, oh, they're still so young. They're people that have they're going back to school, they're starting new businesses, they've written a book and they're out there promoting it out of the back of their car, whatever it is. So that's the writing of a new story. In the third act, one of the things as a writer, I'm writing a novel now. If you know how the book ends at the beginning, the reader's probably going to know too.
Mm. Okay.
It's pretty, it's going to be obvious along the way. And the
Right.
best books and the best stories, whether it's Shakespeare or Herman Melville or Mark Twain, you don't know what Huck Finn's going to do. You don't
Right.
know what's going to happen to, the whale, you know. So
Right.
So we don't know where we're going to, but everything in our life is taking us to that moment. So if we don't show up with this curiosity, this openness, this willingness, and I can't have any of those things if I'm locked into the story of what was and the story of how I think it's all going to turn out now. In other words, it's downhill from here. I got to take all these pills. The story I'm telling what happens to most people you call old? What do they talk about? Politics, sports, their grandchildren, and their doctor visits and their
Their
illness.
health.
And
Yeah.
that's all they talk about. No wonder their lives are small.
Right.
I don't
Right.
hang out. I set the tone of all my relationships now by talking about this. And if they want to talk about that, I don't spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah. Well, and I love this. So what you're saying is that, we hit that third act. We still have stories to tell. It's not the stories of the past, the stories of the future.
And
And
they're
what are those going to
unknown.
be?
They're miraculous. It's up to us to discover them.
Yes. So, September is also self-care month.
Yeah.
And self-care, I've been in this wellness space now for a long time, the family caregiving space for, more than 2 decades. And self-care is all of a sudden getting a backlash. Like, you're just indulging and, you're not giving back. You're just focusing on yourself. And, so I want to just hear your thoughts on healthy aging, self-care, maybe your secrets on how do we take care of ourselves as well as take care of others, or that generativity of giving back. Just talk a little bit about that and what self-care means to you.
Well, I believe that what the third act has historically means is diminished capacity, right? Historically, that's what the third act. We got to the place where we weren't as good at work anymore. We weren't needed for this anymore. We couldn't earn at the same level anymore. We couldn't compete. So we could put it under this idea of diminishing capacity, right?
Mhm.
And if we judge everything by those old criteria, certainly true. Now, if I've spent a whole lifetime not eating properly, not getting the right sleep, not knowing about exercise, then I'm going to arrive at my third act, and my third act is going to be completely about coping with the diminished capacity things that I'm confronted with, all of the diseases that crop up and all this other stuff. So it behooves us to become very self-centered and very selfish and very self-care oriented if we want to be alive to make a contribution. And like anybody, if I'm going to the Olympics and my guy says you can't have sex if you're a boxer 6 weeks before a fight, you got to have six egg whites every morning. You don't argue.
Right.
That's what you do if you want to achieve something. So, I know, for example, I need 7 hours of sleep a night. 6.5's okay, but I got to get them before 10 p.m. If I get them after 10, 8.5 are not enough. 10 are not enough. So if I say to you, I want to write a book and I want to make a difference in how people age, and then my actions don't corroborate with that. In other words, wait, if I'm going to not be able to write the next morning because I'm foggy and tired, then clearly I'm not doing what I said I want to do. So it really behooves us in our third act more than any other time. And I talk about this a lot. It was one of the other things I wasn't aware of when I was writing. And that's this idea that we finally have a feedback system. When you're young, you can get away with everything. So there's no feedback system. I have a
Right.
chapter in the book called It's Not Negotiable. My sleep is not negotiable. The fact that I need to eat, I need to stay in ketosis. I need to have a complete anti-inflammatory diet for everything in me to function at the highest level. And frankly, I'm so much happier if everything in me and functions at the highest level. Doing anything short of that is both selfish and self-destructive. And so which are both opposite of self-care and also opposite of caring for others. If I'm not available at my maximum capacity, if all I'm dealing with is fighting off diminished capacity issues or diminishing capacity. So I don't spend hardly any time fighting off diminishing capacity. If I can't run anymore, then I walk on the beach. I don't say, God, it's horrible, I can't run anymore. Okay, well then I hike in the mountains and I get to do it with a friend. And so and I get to do it in nature. And all of a sudden, there's all these benefits because I hate going to the gym.
Right.
I don't have to be in a stuffy place. Now, other people don't hate it. To them, it's feeding, but I need, so there's all these upsides to self-care that make me not only healthier for things, but make me happier so that when I show up to do that stuff for other people, I'm a freaking rock star in terms of it, in terms of I show up happy. I show up energetic. It's so rare I complain about anything because that's not part of my headset anymore because I'm doing everything I can. And you get to a place in life, and this is a big issue in the West, we are in a culture where nothing is ever enough. When you get to your third act, if you're going to have a good third act, you got to go, hey, this is it. This is who I am. I'm going to take the best care of it I can, and I'm going to accept the things I cannot do anymore. In the 12-step world, there's a serenity prayer, accept the things I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? That's being healthy. So yes, self-care is critical to me showing up at my maximum level, in my maximum emotional state, with my maximum level of mental clarity at this age,
Right.
and spiritually fit. And if I'm
Yeah.
not doing that, I'm not of value to anybody.
Well, and that's what I love because your book, and I'm such a student of this, is it's multifaceted. It's the physical, it's the mental, it's the emotional, it's the spiritual. There's so many different elements that come together to give you kind of that optimal aging. We've got just about a minute left. Any last thoughts for our audience, just in terms, and by the way, the art of conscious aging, I love, the art piece of it, that it is an art form to really to do this right. But any last thoughts? And then what we'll do is if we get cut off, I'll make sure the audience knows where to find you and your book,
Okay,
but
great.
tell us quickly last thoughts.
I just think that we're at an age where we get really good feedback if we're willing to accept it. If I can't do something and it doesn't work, I can either be upset about that or I can say, what can I do? And this adaptability, this thing, what I call the re-years, reimagine, recreate, redesign, reinvent, re-embody, reincarnate. There's so much chance to find myself as this person in this next phase of life that's radically different. And you just give yourself permission to let the old part of yourself just move into a secondary spot and let this new part emerge and give it the opportunity, give it the health it requires, the sleep it requires, the friends it desires. Dump the people that are holding you back, that are lead weights. Walk away from things that no longer serve you. Live within the conceptual framework that you get a whole new life in front of you. Something you didn't necessarily plan for, direction you didn't necessarily see coming, opportunities that are beyond your wildest dreams. That instead of you're on like this long downhill slide towards oblivion, in medicine they call it the period of critical demise. And in the 1900s, it was about 1/3 of 1% of your life expectancy, which was 2 to 3 months. You got pneumonia and you died. Now it's 6%. It's about 6 to 8 years for most people of critical demise. So instead of this idea that it's this long downhill slope, that there's a whole new world available to you. And when you look around and you see the people that are elders that are happy, they're the people that have embraced that idea that, hey, and you'll hear people say, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know, and I see you're doing the same. This is the best it's ever been. Yeah, there's a lot of things I can't do, but I am happier with myself. I am happier with my surroundings. I'm happier with how I spend my days. I don't have a single person in my life that I meet with on a regular basis that I don't like.
Yeah.
I don't have anyone in my life that I complain about. Oh my God, what would life be without having people to complain about? Even family, you grow to accept them all. So stepping out of this idea that that really limits our life when we're younger, of that there's never enough, not enough time, not enough money, not enough people, not enough opportunities, not enough acknowledgement, to this place like, hey, It is what it is. It's
Right.
working just fine. It's not broken. And I have all these possibilities. 5 years ago, just before COVID happened, I didn't plan on this. I was leading workshops in China. 100 people came to a workshop called Authentic Happiness. You know how important teaching authentic happiness was in China? I mean, these people's lives were radically changed from one 3-day workshop weekend. That rippled through the culture. I don't know how, but I know because of what changed in that room. I never planned on going to China to do that.
Right.
It wasn't on the wish list. It wasn't on my vision board, So I think everything's possible, and I think that's the main thing people need to know as they approach their third act. Don't limit it by what it should be, what it isn't, and what hasn't happened yet. And open yourself to this idea that the best is, I have a byline in my thing, which is the rest of your life, the best of your life. Why not?
Yeah.
Yes, there's going to be things you can't do, but there's going to be a whole slew of things that you do that are better.
Well, and I love, your accept and then adapt, right?
Yeah.
So you're not accepting defeat, you're pivoting. You're like, "Okay, here's how it is now, and I'm gonna have to go this way with it." You mentioned, and since we have a couple more minutes here, you mentioned authentic happiness, and I know that's a part of your book too, and I think that's something that is so important to people. We are in the pursuit of happiness. What does it really mean? Tell us what is authentic happiness?
So I break it down into a few things, and it's partly based upon positive psychology and partly based on my own interpretation of that. So the lowest form of happiness is called pleasures and pleasantries. Eating a good meal, having a nice conversation. The next level is basically flow, is getting into this state. The next level of happiness is flow, where you get lost in time and you're doing something that really brings you great pleasure. The next level is collaboration, is deep community connection, intimacy with others. And the highest level is values, and making a contribution. In other words, being a benign force in the world. And so as we age, many people get stuck where the only thing that makes them happy when they're older is the pleasures and pleasantries. So they all become foodies or golf addicts or whatever it is. And that's really just such a limited piece of the puzzle. Flow, I mean, I took up sculpting at 50. I'm an incredible sculptor. Who knew? I started
Right,
carving stone. This is
right.
that there's one of
Yeah,
my carvings, right? Can you see it?
gorgeous. Yes,
Right.
it's gorgeous.
So, I didn't know that at 30 or 40. Um,
Right,
when I did that, 8 hours can go by like that, right? That's the
right.
flow state. Intimacy, the kinds of relationships you can have after you're no longer bound to this person at work, or you have to be nice to your kids or your parents or relatives, or, when you're really exploring. And intimacy changes so much in the third act because it's no longer romantic intimacy as much as deep soul connection, sharing a common vision. And then, of course, the highest form, which Maslow talks about in the hierarchy of needs, is self-actualization, where we put all the parts of ourselves together and we make a contribution. And nothing feels better than doing that. So the authentic happiness in our third act is flow states, better connection to community, and giving back.
I love that. And I think that's a great way for us to wrap this up. But I want our audience to know there is so much in your book that is so meaningful and that you can really glean. What I love about it is you give us so much good information, and it's, as you said, your personal story, other people's personal stories, but you allow the reader to interpret it and create their own, you know, prescription. So it's
Thank
not a
you.
book that says, do this and you will get this. It's more about think about it this way and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think that for me it was really important. And for example, one of the areas in the book that could normally be prescriptive is diet, right? I had to really ask myself, I know a lot about food, right? But I had to really ask myself, what's the important element? And basically, the only thing you really need to know about diet is if you're, the only cause of real problems when you're older is, are you in an inflamed state or not? So you have to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. Now, that can be vegan, it can be keto, it could be carnivore, it could be any of the diets that are out there, but you need to know that inflammation is the cause of cancer, Alzheimer's, every form of thing are state of prolonged disease that poisoned an organ or a body part. That's what causes all of those things. Prolonged disease. And that disease is commonly referred to in medicine as an inflamed state.
Yeah.
So I talk about that, and then I give you examples of. So I do that with everything in the book, and thank you for acknowledging it, because it was a big decision all the way through. Which is, look at, this is the price you're going to pay for. One of the things I talk about is, what's the price of admission for every action when you're older. If you ask yourself that thing when you're going to have one more dessert, or you're going to have to, is it really worth staying up that late when I really want to do this tomorrow morning? Those are questions that you can ask as an adult, because you're not driven by your ego, your desire to get famous or to have sex or whatever it is that's going to drive you otherwise. And you can say, what's the price of admission for this thing? So I think in every one of those things, I give people, I sort of like flesh it out. So I call my book the operating manual for the third act.
I love
Follow,
that.
make your own decisions about these things. How much or how little is up to you. And the choice is enjoy, be happy, experience deep, profound satisfaction, or struggle, suffer, and you know, start critical demise. Pretty
Yeah.
easy choice for me.
Yeah. Well, Wayne, we could talk to you all day. We could do a whole nother hour on all the great things in your book, but
Next
I want to
time.
just thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing your insights and tell our audience where can they find, first of all, where can they find your latest book, The Art of Conscious Aging, and then where can they find out more information about you?
They can find my latest book on my bookshelf or on Amazon.
Okay.
And it's on Amazon. It's called The Art of Conscious Aging, Wayne Lehrer. But it's easily get there. I also wrote a previous book. If you're looking to really find your life's purpose in later life, it's called The Prodigy Within. That's also available on Amazon. And there's a workbook that comes with this that you can also purchase, or you can download a free PDF of it if you buy the book. And then my website is waynelehrer.com, WAYNELEHRER. And if you go there, if you have specific questions, I offer a free 20 to 30-minute discovery call, because I do coaching with people who are having challenges in their third act, or finding ways to manifest who they are in their third act. So you can come on, do a free session with me. If it turns into coaching, great. If not, we can certainly deal with a issue in a very profound way. And then there's also you can sign up. I send out fortune cookies twice a week, and the fortune cookies are 299 words, sort of third act issues. So, one of them's called, they have different titles. One is, the life you're living, the story you're telling is the life you're living, or these are the good old days, you know, and then I'll say, three paragraphs on that. And I send those out twice a week through my
I
newsletter.
love that. Oh, I love that. Well, we're going to have those links on our episode guide page.
Great.
So again, Wayne, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was just a thrill.
Oh, it was such an honor. It's so great sharing this with you. Thank you so much. Thanks for such thoughtful questions too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we try.
You're doing a great
Anyway.
job. You're doing a great service too.
Well, thank you. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
So many great insights from Wayne, and it really is a terrific book. There's so much more that we didn't cover that you're going to find in this book. So we will have links, of course, on the episode guide page to where you can buy the book, where you can find out a little bit more about Wayne's work. And we just really, it was just really a thrill to have him on. So let's switch gears now and turn to Well Home Design news. And as I mentioned up front, there's kind of a startling new study and statistics coming out around falls for older adults, particularly happening at home, but just kind of falls in general. And as we know, just statistically, 1 in 4 adults over the age of 65 will fall at home. And that results in about 2 to 3 million ER visits each year. There's also 41,000 deaths every year from falls. And once you've fallen at home, then you really increase your risk for having a second fall. And as we know, as we get older, it takes our bodies longer to recover. Bones don't repair themselves as fast. The rehab is a little bit more painful and tough and longer. And when we talk about those deaths, that's the thing that's really alarming with some of these new statistics. Now, on September 22nd through 26th, just a quick shout out, we are celebrating or honoring, commemorating, focusing on Falls Prevention Awareness Week. And I'm going to give you a couple resources at the end of this little segment on falls where you can get more information, learn about ways that you can help. And certainly, I have information on my website will have links to articles and things on how to modify your home to prevent those falls. But going back to what's happening, before we get into the new research, I wanted to just make a couple of comments about falls. I came across this article and it was really disturbing, and it's about social media. And as I mentioned earlier, I kind of have a love hate relationship with social media. There are certainly some positives about it, but I see so much negative, and it's just a big concern. And this is one of those big concerns. So, this is how social media played a role in actually a dementia related death. So, this is the article. Back in March of this year, there is a Facebook Messenger chat bot named Big Sis Billy. Okay. And it reportedly lured cognitively impaired man to a physical address across state lines. Now, we know that wandering is a big, huge problem in our dementia community. 60% of people with Alzheimer's disease will wander. And that is a huge, huge concern for family caregivers. And as many of you know, I've done some work with a startup company called TheoraCare. I've worked on a campaign called No Fear, which is about wandering and about falls. I'm going to have a link again on the episode guide page, so I won't get into it here, but you may want to check that out because that is one of these age tech solutions that can help possibly keep your loved ones safe and prevent that wandering and those falls. But anyway, so this chatbot, Big Sis Billy, lured this man with Alzheimer's across state lines. He tripped and fell along his journey and ultimately died from his injuries. Okay, I mean, come on, what is going on out there? So I don't know a lot of the other details about the story because I just picked it up off an article that I saw. I don't know why he was on social media. I don't know what he was doing. I didn't even look at this Big Sis Billy because I just hate all this stuff. So, I didn't do my due diligence and check it out, but if any of you know about this or you talk to your older loved ones and they're chatting it up with Big Sis Billy, you may wanna, take a look because it's clear that some of this stuff there was also really disturbing, kind of an unrelated to aging, but certainly related to gerontology, which is the study of from the womb to the tomb, how we age and all those things. There was another study that was, or I'm sorry, this news story that came out about an AI um, chatbot that was talking to, I think it was either a teen or a preteen, and was encouraging this person to commit suicide because one of the things that AI does is in its machine learning, it's listening to you. And if you're articulating positives about suicidal ideation, it's going to keep reinforcing that. Anyway, the sad, sad, tragic commentary on that is that that teen did commit suicide. So, gotta be careful, folks, about this technology. I know all of you, many of you love it. I have friends who live on Facebook, live on Instagram. I only do it for business because I have to. But seriously, we just have to be very careful and we have to protect our loved ones, both our younger loved ones, our older loved ones, and ourselves, because we know it can impact our stress levels and anxieties and all that too. And then my other just little quick rant about falls is something that happened to my mom a few years ago. So many of us know about the blind bumps that are on streets, particularly as you come to curbs. And it's what it's doing is when a person who is blind feels those bumps, they know not to walk out into the street. But now many of I know in my neighborhood, we now have some audio. Now, if you're blind and deaf, it would still be a problem, but the audio tells you stop, 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 okay, go. So you don't really need the blind buffs. And here's the problem. So we solved a problem for our blind community, and then we created a problem for our aging community. My mom fell. She split her lip. Her tooth went through her lip. We had to take her to emergency. It was very, very traumatic for her, for me, for my brother that was there, thank God, with me. But, I mean, as we get older, our gait is not the same. Maybe we need mobility assistance. We're using a cane or a walker, and those bumps are, I'm sorry, they're ridiculous. So I don't know what the solution is. I don't want to denigrate our blind community, but at the same time, I don't want to see my mom fall again. And I certainly don't want to see an increase in falls for our older population. And by the way, there's a man in Northern California in his 70s. Same kind of thing happened. He fell on the blind bumps, broke his femur, which is your thigh bone, and had a very, very long, 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 painful rehab and recovery. And he's suing the city where he fell. So pay attention to those and be cognizant when you're out with an older loved one to be really, really cautious if you have any of those blind bumps. As we were coming out of a restaurant, is where they were, and we were waiting for the valet Parker to bring the car up, and had to walk across these bumps to get there, and that's when it happened. So now let's get into this new research. Okay, so there was a New York Times article that reported on, it's actually not a lot of new research, it's more it's looking at statistics. And what they did is they looked back over the last 30 years, and they looked worldwide. So this is not just the US, but it was also, we looked at statistics, or they looked at statistics in Europe and Japan. And what they found is that fall injuries and fall deaths, so that's a death that is precipitated by a fall. So that was the mitigating factor in the death among Americans over the age of 65, tripled in the US over the last 30 years, but did not increase significantly in Europe or Japan. Okay, why? Hello, right? We all have pretty much the same kind of streets, the same kind of homes, you know, certain things are very, very similar, right? So why? So here's what this research showed is that we have a culprit, and guess what? It's called medications, drugs, pharmacology. We're an over-medicated society, and unfortunately, this is causing more falls, which are increasing in severity and causing more deaths. So let me just read to you some of the stuff from this research. The types of medications that are particularly bad. So if you're a caregiver, you may want to check these out with your loved one. Benzodiazepines. Okay, we talk a lot about these benzos. They call them benzos. I will tell you that benzos are used very frequently in memory care because benzos are used to address anxiety and agitation, insomnia, and also some seizures. But we know that agitation and anxiety can become huge in people with Alzheimer's, particularly if they're sundowning when dusk happens. And so what do? They immediately give them a benzo shot. Okay, not good. The next one is opioids. I think we all know that opioids are there to help with severe, severe pain, but we also know we've had opioid addictions. It's been a huge problem in this country. They're on the list. Antidepressants, which are your SSRIs, so that's a little different from anxiety, antidepressants, but they're still bad. They're on the list. Gabapentin, I think I'm saying that correctly. And that's mostly for epileptic seizures, nerve pain, restless leg syndrome, which a lot of older people get, and then even antihistamines like Benadryl. So all of these drugs are now on a list called the FRIDS. And what that stands for is fall risk increasing drugs, okay? The bad list. And these drugs increase your falls risk by 50 to 75%. My goodness, we don't need that. We do not need that. And mostly it's due to dizziness, But kind of blur, almost like a blurred vision. It can, we can get blurred vision from it. We can get higher blood pressure, even though it's supposed to help our blood pressure. But if we're bending over and getting up, even though we have medication, you can still have all that. Anyway, all of those things are increasing risk 50 to 75%. So now the skeptics are saying, well, hold on, wait a minute. There was really bad reporting 30 years ago. A lot of falls weren't necessarily reported, so we don't know if this is accurate. Okay, fine. But we also know that primary care physicians, many of them, and they are good doctors, but they are not trained in geriatrics. They're not geriatricians, and they're not functional medicine doctors, which is this new breed of doctors who are very holistic. I know there's a big, huge controversy in the medical community, but they are trained on aging issues. So a functional medicine doctor or a geriatrician is going to know about these things, whereas a primary care physician, yeah, they don't really understand what happens as you get older. And oh, you're on, 18 different drugs over the age of, 80. Yeah, that's not good. And so there's a movement now towards de-prescribing. And basically it's, you could be on medications for years and you don't really need it anymore. Now we become addicted to them because they make us feel safe. Maybe they've helped us. We're afraid to go off of them because we did feel better, at least in some of these areas that the drugs are supposed to address. So, I get it. But there are a lot of non-pharmacological therapies now that can get you past certain things where you do not need a drug. And one of the things I wrote about in my first book called A Cast of Caregivers over 13 years ago was not just how we were overprescribed and overmedicated as a society, and that's really across all age groups, but particularly over the age of 50. Man, you have any kind of complaint, whew, they're going to give you a prescription right away. Um, but we don't ask the doctor, what can I take off this list? I've been on this medication for 5 years. I'm feeling pretty good. Maybe I lost a lot of weight. Maybe I did this, I did that, or whatever. Can we go off of this? How do we do that? How do we wean me off of this? Because sometimes you can't just stop them cold turkey. You have to be careful. So you want to talk to your doctor. But let me tell you, the doctors aren't managing your meds. Really, they aren't. Now, if they prescribe a new med, they may take a quick look at the list and make sure that there's not going to be any kind of fatality from a drug interaction with another medication you're taking. But very often they don't really look at it and care. So you have to be your own advocate. Family caregivers, you need to be aware of this because you can help with this. Have the list of medications and say, which one can I come off of? Do I need this anymore? Because one of the things that this research found is that many people, particularly over the age of like 70 or 75, are on medications they do not need anymore. They're just so used to taking them, so they're staying on them. So that's just my little call out for fall prevention. And I want to give you a couple resources. We're going to have links on our episode guide page, but the CDC has a program called Steady. Lots of really great information about how to prevent falls for your loved one. And then also the National Council on Aging has the Falls Prevention Awareness Week activities, and they've also got some good handouts and some other things to think about. So we're going to have those two resources on the episode guide page. Then next, I want to move just really quickly because I'm going to try to get to our solo agers, but I just wanted to touch quickly on the latest in longevity centers and tasks. So Tony Robbins, the big self-help guru, he and some investors got together and they created a longevity center called Fountain Life. And actually, what I found really interesting about this is the CEO of Ashley Furniture is one of the investors. But the mission is to not die of anything stupid. So basically, it's about prevention, right? It's about prevention of chronic illness and then also catching diseases in early stages where you are not symptomatic and yet, you have a higher ability to beat that disease or whatever. So this is mostly based on blood tests and biomarkers, sometimes body scans. And there's 5 centers of this Fountain Life right now. They're in Florida, New York, Dallas, and Houston. And next year they're going to add LA and Miami. But they're also looking to go into luxury hotels where you could get these tests done if you're on a vacation or on a business trip or whatever. But it's a big price tag, of course, as all things are when we first start out with this stuff. But it's $21,500 a year, and that covers a whole like 200 something plus tests, access to a physician, Doesn't necessarily cover your medical care if they find something, or you can drop that down to $10,500 a year, and you can just get the testing process and then have some AI analysis done on it. But again, doesn't cover the medical support. So it's still a big price tag for most people. Now, a more affordable alternative is something called Function Health, and they offer a package of about 160 blood tests and follow-up tests every 3 to 6 months, and that's a $500 a year membership subscription, and then an additional $400 if you want to do a full body scan. So, people are really getting into this. I mean, listen, lots of us don't want to get cancer, certainly. And, sometimes we do maybe want to know if we have an Alzheimer's risk, and we can do blood tests now to look at biomarkers. Doesn't mean you're going to get the disease. It's just going to tell you if you've got an increased risk factor. So you have to be really cautious, because if you're somebody who gets very anxious, or maybe even depressed and stressed out over information on your health, maybe this isn't the way to go. Just pick up the good healthy habits. But if you're somebody who really wants to take control and say, "Hey, let's head this off at the pass." I mean, there's been stories about people who have found that they had, a kidney cancer in the very, very teeniest, tiniest, earliest stages, when a lot of the drugs are more efficacious, when they can get certain surgeries, so, or they can get into certain drug trials. So catching things early is certainly part of the game. But you have to also play out your personality. And if you're one of those people that's just going to stress over it, I'd say don't worry about it. Try to live your best life, be as healthy as possible, do all the things that we talk about with walking, social health, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so now let's move into this solo agers thing that I wanted to tell you about. So solo agers, there's about 12 million solo agers right now in the US. And what that means, and they're over the age of 50, sorry. So that's not solo agers who are younger people who might be living alone. This is only people over the age of 50, 12 million of us, because I'm one of them. And it's mostly older women. Again, women do tend to live a little bit longer than men. So we see mostly older women living alone. And yet what's happening is, they're looking for a housing environment that isn't the typical active senior living where you have to go live in a community that's all older seniors. They love their community, or maybe they want to move to a new neighborhood where it's got a high walkability index. You can walk to certain things like entertainment or even health centers, or other things, get your groceries and food and restaurants and all that. And what was interesting is Joe Coughlin of MIT Age Lab wrote an article in Market Watch, and he said the one person household is not just a lifestyle shift, it is a macroeconomic transformation hiding in plain sight. This is really going to change the complexity and the what's happening in real estate and in building and in senior living and in staying in your homes longer. Things are really going to shift because we've got, a lot of older people. And as we said, uh, you know, they're not all couples. They may be widows or widowers or divorced or never got married, don't have children or family that lives close. So there's a lot of complications, but also opportunities. And so the National Association of Home Builders recently reported that there's actually a move away for some builders of the larger multi-bedroom family homes to the average size home, 2,400 square feet. Interesting. We also know there's things like granny pods that can just be dropped in your backyard if you have enough space. And those are just like little mobile mini homes almost, which is fine for an older person who wants a little bit of independence and privacy, but then they're really close. They're just right there with family. Um, and there's going to be more renters, so that is also going to change the, home ownership situation in the US. And this is why I see so many apartments being built near me. It's amazing. But again, they're looking for amenity rich options, pet services, concierge services, maybe even some tech solutions, gyms, mini marts. I mean, there's a big requirement. It's not just an apartment building anymore. It's a whole community within an apartment, kind of situation. And as I mentioned, the caregiving, which of course is what I focus on. If you're living alone and you don't have children, or grandchildren or any other family living close, you're going to rely on, friends. You're also going to rely on, outsourced services like, personal home care, home health, other things. And so some of these luxury kind of apartments or condos or whatever you want to call them. In the past, we've talked about like CCRCs. These are the very high end continuing care retirement communities. They're now called life plan communities, but you can escalate your care on the same campus. But a lot of them start out with these very luxury kind of apartments. And then there's just communities where it is just apartments for people who are older or whatever. But, we're talking $20,000 a month plus a move-in fee. Typically, those range anywhere from 75,000 to $150,000 just for the privilege of moving in. They're not, for the faint of heart in terms of money and financial wellness. And it's usually for people who are much older and don't anticipate living another 20 years. But for the people who, are in their 50s or 60s or even 70s and they still want to be part of a community, but it might be a little lonely living at home and stuff. There's just a lot changing. So I just wanted to bring this up because I think there's a lot happening. I think you want to be aware of it, particularly as families, as we talk about those long-term care, plans. What are the costs of all these things and all that? I just thought it was really interesting. But I think that solo agers are going to change the real estate game. And I have a lot of friends that are real estate agents, including my shout out to my BFF Molly. And I always share stuff with her, but she also shares stuff with me on all this stuff. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And then finally, before I end the Well Home Design Days, I just wanted to say, don't miss our self-care in 7 minutes solution videos. Here's our videos for this month. As you know, we put them out every week. We've got quite a library of them now on YouTube. So we have happiness versus joy. What's the difference and how do you find both? We have how do you find awe and wonder and how does this build your spiritual wellness? We've got dopamine design, also called neurodesign, but that's more about your environmental wellness. And then we've got 14 hacks, wellness hacks to prevent Alzheimer's. You can check all of those videos out on our YouTube channel. And please subscribe both to our podcast, but also to our YouTube channel so that you get the notifications whenever we upload a new video and new content. Thank you for joining us on this episode. A reminder, you can find more information in my book, Me Time Monday, The Weekly Wellness Plan to Find Balance and Joy for a Busy Life, or visit MeTimeMonday.com or CaregivingClub.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Caregiving Club on Air. Please hit the subscribe button. To listen to us on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, Pandora, as well as other listening channels. Check out all the resources and article links on our episode guide page at caregivingclub.com. Just hit the podcast tab at the top and email us with comments and questions at podcast@caregivingclub.com. Thank you again for listening and take care and stay well.